I never worried about digging until I found gold. I just was so in love with digging.
Oh, I love that.
I just loved digging. I loved being in the trenches with.
What's going on, everybody? This is Chris Naugle, and welcome back to the show. I've got my friend Pace Morby joining me today, and I thought what we would do is kind of talk about the journey of what he's done in his business. As you probably already know, he's just gone from just crazy levels of success. But, we've done the same thing on this end. And the hardest part about this journey is when you get there, time becomes your biggest enemy and the one thing that you gotta fight. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. We talk about sub 2 and what Pace is doing now and what Pace wants to do in the future. So welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. This is your second time on.
A thought-provoking set of questions. A lot of times you go on these podcasts and you and I both, it's like, okay, we know what we're going to talk about. We know some of the stories we're going to tell, but this is not a conversation that a lot of people have. And I think it's important to have this conversation for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you don't know what the end of the pathway looks like, then how do you know you're on the right pathway? And so seeing, where Chris Naugle is and where Pace Morby is after you're following them on a podcast or Instagram or YouTube or whatever else, you're like, okay, that's the path. How do I navigate some of the pitfalls that these guys didn't even know existed along the way? How do I know that I want a life like that? Well, I'll tell you the pluses and minuses of having a really successful life and all of those things. But I want to start it off by saying it's funny that successful people never feel like they've really made it. Even when you hit the 1% of the 1% of even the 1% income earners making millions of dollars in a year, you still feel like you haven't accomplished anything. Do you ever feel like that?
Oh, Pace, I feel like that all the time. And, there's this thing called the arrival syndrome, and that's when somebody arrives at a level of success or a level in their life that they think they've fulfilled everything they want, and they just stop. You lose that passion, you lose that journey, and all of a sudden the only place to go is back down. And people ask me all the time, like a lot of people judge success by money. And you and I, we can hit this, but at this point, it's not about money. You hit a certain level where you're making money and you just have enough to fulfill every desire you would want as a human. And then something happens. And I don't think we're alone in this, Pace. Something happens where all of a sudden it becomes not about us anymore. It becomes about others and giving and helping other people achieve what they want. And, Zig Ziglar spelled it out, but I think when you're on that journey up and you're trying to get to that certain financial level, you don't understand it until you get there. And that's the hardest part about it is the journey is a lonely one. It's like being on a deserted island. When you reach this point where you've got the money and all of a sudden it flips and you just want to serve. You just want to do more. Like the biggest thing that I love doing now is my foundation and giving. And I don't know, it's weird. If I could talk to people 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I wasn't at this level, I couldn't have explained it, but now I can. How do you feel about that?
A bunch to unpack. First and foremost, think about if I'm a brand new person, I'm trying to become wealthy, I'm trying to make money. I know I'm meant for more. I'm destined for more. Well, what we did along the way, what Chris Naugle did and what I did is you acquire skills, resources, relationships, and experiences, and those compound and compound and compound. And so does your ability to utilize those efficiently to then monetize. So I'll give you a really good example. The ability to go to a seller appointment and buy a house that's in distress and a seller that's in distress. That's a skill set I had to go and learn. I had to go pay. I paid $6,000 for a coaching product that taught me how to talk to sellers better. Then that coaching product was like a merit badge. It was like, I now have this badge that I can wear on my lapel. I now can close a seller. I then go and utilize that. I make money. I get a $25,000 assignment fee, or I do a $50,000 flip, or I put a house in my portfolio and then I have monthly cash flow. Okay, cool. You see the results of that. You let it compound and you just put your eyes down on, all you're looking at is where your feet are directly in front of you. And you're just running as fast as you can because you go, wow, this is so much better of a life that I'm currently living than I was 6 months ago when I didn't have this skill set. So then you become addicted to acquiring other skill sets like raising private capital, maybe becoming your own bank. How does the financial world work and how can it benefit me? And you acquire that skill set and that merit badge. Then you get another merit badge of how do I network properly? How do I get higher level friends and leverage those relationships, both giving and receiving from those relationships. That's another merit badge. And you wake up after running down this pathway for years and years and years, and you look up and you have stacks of capital, you have stacks of assets, and other people telling you, wow, it must be really nice to be really successful. And you go, I didn't even realize I was successful. All I was doing was acquiring merit badges and skill sets along the way. And I woke up one day and all of a sudden I have all these things.
I love it.
For me, it was never about the destination. Same thing for you is that I never had arrival syndrome. I haven't had that. I think it's funny. People think I'm more successful than I think I am. All I'm doing right now is playing a game. And if you have fun playing a video game, this is why so many men in America are addicted to playing video games, is because you can solve a problem very quickly and see an immediate result. And then there's this small dopamine rush you get when you solve a problem. And video games is nothing but thousands and thousands of problems condensed in a small package called a video game. If you transfer that attention and you put it on your life and you treat it like a video game, it also becomes addicting. Now, it's in a good way because you actually receive money from it and relationships and acclaim and all these other things. But man, there are things along the way that nobody told you about. Nobody tells you about. And you get to a certain point and you start thinking differently. Now, giving is a big part of that. I think that there's reasons why you give so much. One, this is going to sound weird and I'll be really transparent. Part of the reason people give so much when they hit Chris Naugle and my level, I'm going to take a guess, is that we almost had to numb ourselves from feeling a certain way along the journey of grind. You have to numb yourself from the anxiety, the stress, the pain, all the things you have to go through to be a lunatic business owner, because it's so much work. It is a lot of work. There's a lot of sacrifice along the way. So you numb yourself, you numb your emotions along the way. And then when you help somebody else, you are flooded with the most positive emotions and you almost remember what it feels like to have emotions, because you trained yourself to not let yourself feel emotions along your journey, but you didn't train yourself against feeling the positive energy from helping somebody else. And so all these business owners, you start becoming addicted to helping other people because you see how it changes their life. It gives you dopamine again. And you go, oh my gosh, this is what I was meant for. That's a small part of it. The other small part of it is that you realize that God, the universe, Buddha, Allah, whoever it is in your world, put you on this world for you to acquire those skill sets, those relationships, those merit badges, so that you could turn around and then help your fellow man and create a domino effect. And so I think, Chris, you're in that position. I'm in that position now. And nobody wrote a book on how to be in this position and how to do it properly. And so I think the audience hearing this, one, you should know that, guys, I promise you success is around the corner, but it does require a lot of perseverance. It requires so much perseverance. In fact, for me, it required me to numb myself from the anxiety, the stress of waking up in the middle of the night, stressing about making payroll, stressing out about making my payment on the building we just bought, stressing out, oh my gosh, we got to buy another cargo van to ship this product and I don't have the line of credit big enough to do. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, literally that many problems are in your future if you are choosing to be a business owner. Wow. Just nobody tells you about them. And you can get through them and you can get to the other side of them and you can have piles of gold and millions of dollars and all these things, but it does require you to somewhat, in my world, numb myself to those feelings in order for me to be successful. So one, have the expectation that it's hard. It's harder than you think it's going to be. It's way harder than you think it's going to be, but it also is the only way to get to the other side that you can turn around and give gifts to other people and start charitable foundations like Chris Naugle started. So man, it's been a journey.
It is. And I do want to get into some of those sacrifices because I think it's important, and I think back as you're telling that story, I think the two specific situations, one, about a year and a half ago, I'll never forget, I was pumping gas and a man walks across the street and you could tell he was a homeless man. He had, he was just carrying a couple bags and you could just tell by his dress. And he walked right by me and I was just very alertly watching him. He goes over to the garbage can, takes the top off and starts taking garbage or starts taking garbage out to get cans. And I see him filling this up. I just stopped everything. I didn't even think. And I remember I walked up to him. I opened my wallet. I didn't know how much cash I had. I took all of it out and I just handed it to him. And I said, God bless. And the feeling at that moment, I didn't need him to say anything. I didn't even need to see the look on his face, which, he almost looked like he was going to tear up, but it was just how I felt when I handed that to him. Listen, maybe it was $120. It's irrelevant how much it was. It could have been $5, and that's the thing. When you give, folks, stop thinking there's got to be a set dollar amount. It's just the act of, and from that very moment, I knew that there would never be enough, because there's never going to be enough money that is going to solve all these people's problems. And not that that solves his problem. Hey, listen, maybe he took that money and went and did, bought meth. Maybe he went across the street and got a taco. I don't care. It was just a simple fact that I was able to do that, and it didn't interrupt my life, didn't change my life, but it made me feel like I've never felt before. And I realized that's what I needed to work toward. Now, let me take you back to another time, very early on, the struggle years. And this is what I want to get into in a moment. I was 23 years old. I was in a really hard place. I was a pro snowboarder, had my retail shops, but the .com crash had just hit. And I had just expanded my stores, or heavily leveraged. And I remember I was pretty well broke. Didn't know how I was going to make my car payment. I'm sure some of the folks listening, you've been there, or maybe you're even there now, where you literally don't know how you're going to make the bills the next day. Well, I can certainly tell you I've been there, and I know Pace's story a little bit, and I know he's been there. And I remember I got into the Wall Street world and I sold my first financial product. And I remember thinking, walking out of that person's house, I made $500. And the way that $500 made me feel was just like, it was just hope. And then I did another one, another 500, and then maybe it was 1,000. And you just keep compounding that, like you mentioned. But that journey, it's not about the money, folks. It's about the journey. It's about the excitement of building. But again, you're going to get to this certain level, like Pace mentioned, that there's just no book written, where you just have to make a shift where it's no longer about you accumulating money. And you're always going to, because money just continues to compound. It's the eighth wonder of the world, says Albert Einstein. Whether you want it to or not, at a certain level, it's just going to work for you. But at that point, you have to then go out and do what's right. So Pace, I'd love to take a moment and just go back to some of the sacrifices. A lot of people, want to be at the levels of Pace. They want, the fame, they want the TV show, they want, all the stuff that they see on social media, but they don't quite understand the sacrifice that you gave up to get to that point. And I think it's important that we at least shed a little bit of light on that, because a lot of people, if they knew what you and I have had to go through, the sacrifices from time, not being with our family, not seeing moments of our children's life that we can't get back, understanding that that was the give to get where we're at, a lot of people would just say, you know what, I don't want that. And that's perfectly fine. But if we don't talk about it, I think a lot of people just think, oh, it's perfect. It's a smooth line up. So let's talk about that for a moment.
That's interesting. Let me rattle some off the top of your head. One, you're going to lose a lot of friends along the way.
Yeah.
Now that's a good thing. I didn't realize it was a good thing until, years later, when you watch the path of those friends that you lost and you see where they show up and you go, wow, thank goodness I wasn't in your proximity. Thank goodness I chose these other people. And the way I tell people this is I go, every day I leave my house, I have decisions I'm making on a daily basis. As a business owner, you're not making those decisions for yourself anymore. You're making those decisions for your employees, and you're making those decisions also for your employees' children. Those employees' children don't even know you exist, but that paycheck that the employee is receiving relies on your good decisions. Now, I have 700 employees between our 9 businesses, and that means that 700 paychecks are issued every other week. Out of those 700 paychecks, 4 people rely on each individual paycheck. So a wife, typically 2 kids. So 4 people total. Think about that. 2,800 people rely on that paycheck to show up every 2 weeks. Now, those 4 people eat 3 meals a day. So think about that. Now I've got 2,400 times 3. Now I've got roughly 7,500 meals are fed every single day to families because I make good decisions. So if I go and spend my time with the guy who is busy on the weekend watching sports games and he's not earning new merit badges, so to speak, and new skill sets, then I'm putting my time and energy into that world. And that person is also rubbing off on me, right? Just like when I go to a mastermind, Chris, when you go to a mastermind, you got all these notes. And those notes are really good and tactical, but really what we take away more are the vibrations of the human beings we meet in these masterminds. We watch how they operate. We see how they walk, they talk. Some of them have assistants, some don't have assistants. And in fact, the first time I decided I needed to hire an assistant was when I saw one of my heroes in a mastermind had an assistant with him. I'm like, why don't I have an assistant? And the reality is, it wasn't until I had new friends that I had new ideas and I had new pathways. So the first thing that you're going to realize along the journey is that the friends in your church, the friends from high school, the friends from college, very, very rarely, if not ever, will make the trip with you. And when you're early in your 20s, you still have the high school mentality of, I'm going to bring my friends with me, or I'm going to do work stuff and then play stuff. Guys, I can tell you the only way to be successful is to blend your hobbies, your work life, and your family life almost into a fully integrated circle. What do I mean by that? For example, I'm going to New Jersey this week. I'm going to be speaking on stage. Guess what? I'm bringing my family with me. My children get to see New Jersey. They've never been to New Jersey. So I get to show my kids parts of the world they've never seen before, meet people they've never seen or spoken to before. I get to speak on stage, work stuff. Then after the event is decided, hey, let's go skydiving, or let's go climb a skyscraper on the outside, guided by a tour guide that's climbed skyscrapers. So that's kind of a cool thing that I get to do. That's a personal feeling. But guess what? All three of those things are done in the midst of me going out and making a name for myself or making my companies thrive. So when people say, how do you balance it all? You don't. It has to be fully integrated, or else you're going to sacrifice. Now, there was a time, second thing I'll do, and I want to turn around and ask you the same question. There was a time where I couldn't afford to bring my wife and kids with me on these travel dates. I didn't have access to private flights or first class tickets or whatever. I didn't have access to these things. And I would look at Southwest as, $99 versus $250. I'm going to choose to go a different day, because 7, 8, 9 years ago, about 9 years ago, I'd look at a flight and go, I'm going to go on Tuesday to this event rather than Monday because I can save $179, right? All of those thought processes and the stresses that a lot of the audience or the listeners right now are currently going through, I had to go through them too. I had to go through all of those. And in that process, there's no way I was going to be able to afford to bring my wife and my children with me and then have a hotel room and extra food and travel expenses and all this kind of stuff that is maybe a larger rental car. And, my wife is there. I'm speaking on stage. She's got to go take the kids on activities. That's an extra $2,000 or $3,000 of all these additional expenses. So I had to sacrifice time with my family. Now, on the good side of that, just like sacrificing the old friends from the past has benefits of opening way for new friends of the future that give you new ideas, new experiences, new pathways in your mind. Sacrificing time with my family then now allows me to take my family with me everywhere I go now. And not only that, it affords me the ability to tell my wife, hey, go take the kids to go do X, Y, and Z and give them an experience they wouldn't have otherwise received while I'm standing on stage today. So there's a give and a take. The problem is most people are not consistent enough with the struggles of the beginning, and they don't persist long enough for the compound effect to actually take place. And so they're like, Pace, I've been doing this for 3 years. I'm like, yeah, it took me 5 years to see the compound effect. So what about you, Chris? What are the things you had to sacrifice along the way?
Oh, I'm still sacrificing. Sorry to say that. I mean, I am at the point now where I can travel on private flights with my family. We just went to New York City, to look at some charities that we were going to do some work with. But just like you, I mean, gosh, it seems like it was yesterday that I was looking at flights and I'd be like, no, I can't afford that $600 flight. Where's the cheaper one? I mean, in retrospect, it was probably a decade ago that happened. But the one thing I remember, the sacrifices that I made early on were I didn't have the money to go to the masterminds. I didn't have the money to go to the events. I put it on credit cards, not knowing how I was going to pay it, but I still showed up. There was never a doubt that I was going to make it work, but there was always that gut feeling that I can't afford this. I'll never forget the first education program I went through. It was a real estate education. It was $24,000. I literally had to call the credit card company. They taught me to do it, but to raise the limit on my credit card so that I could go to that. And I rushed home and I told she was my fiance at that time, about it. And she was like, we can't afford that. I said, exactly. But if we don't go, we'll never be able to afford this. And she said, you make a good point. We'll figure it out. And we went to that one, on our own. So that was back then. The sacrifices that I think I've had to make have been primarily, like you said, friends. So they say it's lonely on the top, and it really is, but only if you allow it to be. If you allow enough time to let the loneliness set in because you don't have the friends you used to go drink with and go to the games with and all that, then you're focused on the wrong things. But all the people that I grew up with at school, I still know them. They still hit me up on social media, but none of them in my book would be called friends anymore because they weren't willing to make the sacrifices I was. They weren't willing to leap. I always talk about the leap, whether it was when I was a pro snowboarder standing at the top of a jump that just scared the death out of me. I always had the leap, and the outcome, you never knew what it was going to be. But if you did, and you made it to the other side, you made it over the landing, when you landed, there was no greater feeling. And I got addicted to that. I got so addicted to that literally, like, sometimes I think I went a little bit too hard in my pursuit to where I am today, whether it was snowboarding, building businesses. And a lot of times I went too fast. And because I went too fast, I failed. I had a lot of failures, and those failures crippled my family. There was a time where me and Larissa had bought our dream house, and I was doing really well on Wall Street. We owned a lot of rentals. I think I was up to 36 rentals. And remember, I was in my 20s at this point, and I thought I was on the top of the world. Then one thing happened. The bank called, a line of credit, and all of a sudden it just tumbled down like a house of cards. And when that all happened, my relationship fell apart. We had to put that dream house, 171 Radcliffe, up for sale. All the Audis that I had in the driveway had to all be sold. Now, the final moment was, I remember Larissa had left. She had rented a different house. We had split. And I'm sitting in the bedroom, and this gentleman and his wife walk in, and they grabbed my bed, my dresser, and, some end tables, and they walked out of my house. Now, I had put them on Craigslist, but there was a realization at that point, staring at this empty bedroom, of just the deepest, darkest failure that I'd ever had in my life. All this stuff that I'd built up, that I'd worked so hard for, just all got stripped from me because I made a bad decision. And it wasn't even my decision. The bank made the decision, but it was because of my actions. And it just tumbled me down. So I had to rebuild all of that. I had to relearn who I was, and I had to go out there and do the hard work again and again and again. And that wasn't the last time I failed. I failed again in 14. I built up a whole bunch of other stuff, and it all fell apart. It was just like, it's just been a constant state of failure. And now I've gotten to a point where literally, I'm not saying that failure can't happen, but it would be less likely to happen at this point, just because you build that compounding. But you mentioned 5 years. I think my compounding took me probably the better part of 10 years to even get it to the point where it was really starting to work on its own. And I've had to pivot a lot. I've had to change friends. I've had to fire friends. I've had to fire coaches and mentors. Every one of those mini decisions, which, listen to this podcast, like, oh, that would be easy. It wasn't in the moment. When I had to call that person and tell them that I could no longer work with them, or I didn't want to, either because I couldn't afford them, or just they weren't serving my greater purpose. You do outgrow people. You outgrow coaches. I tell some of my students, I'm just like, listen, you're going to outgrow me. The student will become the teacher. And if that's not their pursuit, then they're not trying hard enough. So I think the sacrifice for me,
great point.
The sacrifice for me in today's realm is, I've got a 3-year-old, and she's my everything. I mean, just like your kids. I mean, there's not a single thing in the world that matters more than a simple hug by her. I was on a debate last night. This client wanted me to debate IUL versus whole life. And I did it just because, hey, I'm always up for a challenge. But an hour and 20 minutes into it, going nowhere, just listening to rambling, I finally stopped the whole meeting, and I said, listen, I don't mean to be rude, but I've got a daughter sitting at home waiting for daddy to come home so she can give me a big hug. And we're sitting here talking about things that just mean absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. We're not even talking about the client's needs and goals, because I keep trying to bring it back there, but you keep taking it over here. So I literally said, I can't do this anymore. And I literally dismissed myself. And that was hard to do. I'm always up for a good challenge. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm just always up for a fight and a good challenge. But it hit me that, like, literally, I'm doing this in sacrificing time with my daughter. And how many other times do I do that? The answer is too many. So Pace, I'm at a point now where literally I'm pausing travel, which is very hard because that's what I do every single week, it seems. After this weekend, my trip to Montana, I'm pausing travel for, I don't even know how long. Month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it takes for me to feel fulfilled that I've given my daughter the adequate amount of time and my family the time. So sometimes we just have to back ourselves into a corner and realize, like, what sacrifice is actually worth it? And that's where I'm at right now. And you know what I think is going to happen? And you already know the answer. I'm going to do this, and my business is actually going to grow even faster because I'm actually going to stop. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, is just pump the brakes, to actually stop and smell the roses and see what's really going on. And then you can focus on how and what needs to be focused on, and everything else explodes. But I think a lot of people are just stuck in that proverbial fast forward, and life goes by. Their kids are 18, 19 going off to school, and they're just like, I was never around. I've read it in the books, and I refuse to allow that to be my end story that I have to look back on someday.
Yeah, I love that insight. Just this last week, I was at a Tony Robbins private event. Only 6 of us were in the room for 3 days. Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi, Russell Brunson, myself, and Jim Quick, of just some of the most unbelievable people in this room. So I fly my wife and all 3 kids out to the Breakers in Palm Beach, Florida with me. And they were with me for 3 days. We spent a whole day in the ocean, whole day at the pool because we went a day early. Then the day that I was in the mastermind, they were off doing things, playing golf, doing things together. And then we got together for dinner. Obviously, the next day I drove them to the airport while I went back to the mastermind. Now, why did my wife, go home early? Well, because my daughter, who's 4, had a dance recital that I wasn't able to make it. Why? This was a really hard conflict for me. This is something that I sat down and really gave myself when I got back to the hotel room that night without my wife and kids, because now they left and they're on the plane heading back to Phoenix. I sat down and I'm like, is missing my daughter's dance recital more important because of which is more important? Going to my daughter's dance recital and jumping on a plane right now, or going to tomorrow's mastermind where Tony Robbins himself is going to be running the thing with only 6 people in the room? Now, if you know what I took home from that, which I took home a lot, I could even unpackage that. There was an exchange there, right? The exchange was missing a day with my daughter doing a dance recital, even though I just spent the whole day with her in the pool and the whole day with her in the ocean. And we did things that other people didn't do and don't have the ability to do, right? I fly my little girl first class and all the things and, spoil her to a certain degree, but that doesn't mean I'm spending time with her necessarily. So the things I took away was, 1, a relationship with Tony Robbins, who is planning on investing in multifamily with me and a couple of my partners. He also gave me some opportunities as well, saying, hey, do you want to be involved here? Do you want to be involved here? I'm like, with Tony Robbins, pinch me, freaking pinch me, right? Conversations about potentially writing a real estate book with Tony Robbins and having that become a bestseller. I mean, pinch me, right? And the argument there is, well, one part of you says, well, yeah, my daughter and her future husband and their children and their children's children might benefit from a book that you write with Tony Robbins. So that's the justification, right? Well, the trade-off there also could be an argument of, you have your daughter one time. You have her at 4 years old one time, going to her dance recital one time. You have this opportunity one time. And so that, guys, is one of the hardest things that you have to go through. I told my wife a couple of years ago, I said, wouldn't it be amazing if your money-making years were not during your baby-making years?
Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be nice, but that's not the beautiful thing about life. The beautiful thing about life is that you are forced to make a balanced decision, and you get to create your own outcome. And then you get to sleep in that bed that you make. And you have to come up with the justifications, whatever it is. There's a justification one way or the other. And these are things that people don't write in books. And also, it's not like if anybody else was in the room with Tony Robbins, they would have had the same, meaning more or less opportunities than I created for myself in that room, that it would have made it worthy or not worthy of their time. Somebody else would have walked into that room and sat there on the couch and not said anything to anybody and opened up their mouth and created opportunities. So for me, my justification was, I know how to work a room. I know how to get in and build relationships with people. I know how to create partnerships long-term, that is not just worthy of my time, but it's worthy of me taking my time away from my daughter to go do those things. And it's a hard Chris, you probably have to make those decisions no less than a dozen times a week.
Yes. Yep.
Because at your level, you have so much demand on your time. So many people want to talk to you. You get text messages out of the blue that say, hey, can I get 5 minutes of your time? The Chris of 10 years ago is like, yes, I'll get on the phone with anybody for anything. I just want to help. Right. Then you realize, you get older, that the people that want to just take 5 minutes of your time on the phone are the people that skipped your videos on YouTube or skipped your podcast that actually answered the question. And then you're like, okay, well, I want to be a giver, but I realize I'm stealing time and energy away from my family because you're not willing to go do the work before you reach out to me. Like, you start learning those things, and those decisions become incredibly easy. You start shutting down those phone calls. You start shutting down certain opportunities because you realize where they're coming from, their intention, et cetera. But then there's these really good opportunities of like, hey, Chris, this opportunity is coming up in 3 months. You need to travel for it, and you need to be away from your family for 5 days. And just so happens it coincides with some parent teacher conference or some other thing. And you have to sit there and you have to make a really, really challenging decision.
Your real estate business lives and dies by the network and the connections that you make. I mean, after all, your network, well, it's your net worth. That's what you always heard, right? If that's an area where you desire improvement, well, Private Money Club, it's for you. PMC saves you precious time and money by bringing the real estate world, well, right to you, right in the palm of your hand. So get in on the action, like so many others have, by going to privatemoneyclub.com and sign up.
Yeah, I think you're right. Those decisions at this level, for anyone that is at this level or even higher, like, we've all had to make them. And those decisions are almost daily. You're absolutely correct. That 5 minutes, which to them is nothing. I just need 5 minutes of your time. First off, it's never 5 minutes. But when you get them on the phone, they know nothing about what it is you truly do because they haven't engaged and put their time in, but yet they want to take your valuable time, but they didn't put the time in to learn the things that are all there. I mean, like, Pace, I know you do this as well, but my YouTube channel is my number one source, and I spend just on production, editing, no marketing, no advertising dollars, 22 grand a month, and it's about to be 27,000 a month. Now, for some people, they're just like, that's crazy, but it's really not, because that's where all of my value is. And I give it for free. It's the ultimate give. I mean, think about that. Like, people say, well, how much do you give? Well, what's my time worth first? But also, I spend $23,000, $22,000 to $23,000 every month to produce content for you. I don't ask for anything in the videos. If you end up doing business with me, that's because I gave you so much value that you're just like, well, I need this. But that's the whole thing a lot of people have wrong, is they go out there and they want to spend $1 and they instantly want to get $5 back. But they don't understand, you're going to spend $5 to get $1 back. And that might take years of doing that. And you just got to make it to the end, because then eventually that flip happens. You spend $1, you get $5, but it didn't happen. It's not overnight success. It's 5 years, 10 years, sometimes longer to hit that point. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that, or just simply don't know. And when they get there, they're always cutting themselves short 3 feet from gold. It's a great book written by Greg Reed.
Wonderful book.
3 feet from gold. I mean, just read it. That tells the story of most people in their entrepreneurial journey. They fell 3 feet from success, from gold. And I think the difference between Pace and myself is just, we were just never willing to stop 3 feet from gold. And that last 3 feet's always the hardest. I don't know how many of you run or do any kind of physical activity, but you always know, like, if you set out to run a 3 mile or 5 mile or 10 mile run, what's the hardest part of your run? The last half of a mile. But if you don't complete that last half mile, you'll regret it the rest of your life. But then you do complete it. You're physically and mentally drained and exhausted, but you did it. That's entrepreneurship, folks. It's that last little bit that makes the biggest amount of difference. But too many people stop there. And the other problem, I think, and this is a Will Rogers quote, and I repeat this all the time, but this is one of the biggest things stopping people from the greatness that they were put on earth to be. And Will Rogers said the biggest problem in America is not what people don't know. He said the biggest problem in America is what people think that they know that just ain't so. I was so guilty of that, Pace. When I was an advisor, I had an ego probably as high as any skyscraper you've ever seen, because I thought I knew what I didn't know, because that was my training. And I think a lot of people, whether they're looking at what you do, and you're not the first to do the sub two, but you're the first one that brought it down to such a simple level, and you layered branding on it, which was genius. I'll never forget, gosh, it doesn't even feel like it was that long ago, but I think it was. I remember seeing your logo, that one on your hat, the one that you always brand yourself with. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, and truth be told, like this logo on my hat came after I saw Pace's logo. And I'm just like, I need a simple logo that people can identify to. It's branding, folks. And nobody really realizes the significance of that, or how much money has to be put behind branding that you really don't recoup anything on, just to get people to recognize that as being a specific value add in their life, or solving a problem. And, you know, Pace, what you've done so eloquently, and I watch so much of your stuff, is you solve a very big problem for a lot of people. And folks, when you really look at any successful entrepreneur, the number one thing they do day in and day out, all those sacrifices we talked about earlier, is they solve a really big problem for somebody else. You see, Pace didn't start by solving Pace's problem. Pace started by solving somebody else's problem. Chris Naugle started by solving somebody else's problem. But I will tell you, in my past, it wasn't that way. I was out to solve Chris Naugle's problem first, and then I'd solve somebody else's problem. And you know what happened every time? You heard me. Fail. I mean, how many times can you fail before you learn? You got to change your focus on you and make it about everybody else's problem. That's whose problem you solve. And if you just figure that out, and then you figure out how to brand it and make it simple, success is going to happen. Matter of fact, success is going to be your biggest problem. Because when you reach a certain level of success, everything we talked about in the beginning of this show is what you're going to have to deal with. The sacrifices, the demands, it's endless.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to sound like woe is me, but you need to understand what it looks like to be in the position, right, that you want to be in. You don't want to, nobody wants to be in the NBA if you know that NBA players don't make any money, right? There's a reason people want to be in the NBA, because they realize, okay, well, in spite of all the problems that you have as an NBA player, how much more practice, how much more skilled you have to become, I'm okay with that because I know what it looks like. I know how much money and the benefits that you get from it. So the reason we paint the picture of, hey, these are problems that you'll run into, is so you understand that this is the path you have to go down. Now, going back to your part about compounding and the problem with people quitting before they hit gold, here's a big difference. And write this down if you guys are taking notes. I never worried about digging until I found gold. I just was so in love with digging.
Oh, I love that.
I just loved digging. I loved being in the trenches with my friends and the people I was collaborating with. And I loved talking to people about, what shovel do you have? And what's your technique? And how are you doing this? And then all of a sudden somebody goes, man, are we going to hit the gold soon? I'm like, wait, we're digging for gold? I just thought we were digging. And so when you change the mindset of, I just love the grind, and I'm so grateful for this, because I'm in the 1% of the 1% of people that this doesn't bother. But I'm grateful for the fact that everything is way harder than you think it is. Okay. What happens is people will join. I've seen this. I've seen on like Reddit forums and somebody bashing somebody's mentorship program, not mine, but like I'm on there and I see something. I'm like, you expected this to be something you purchased, and then the thing you purchased solved your problem, rather than just equipped you with a better shovel to dig a deeper hole, like to get to the gold. People don't realize that it does take more than a year. It does take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you will fail along the way, because failure is not just okay, but failure is a requirement in order to succeed. You have to fail to learn and all those kind of things. But what happens, I think the biggest issue with people being an entrepreneur, in the world of entrepreneurship, they think that they're going to come up with a new strategy, and that strategy itself is the easy button, rather than the strategy just being a better shovel. But the digging still needs to be dug. The hole needs to be dug. The ditch needs to be trenched, and all of those things until you get to the gold. So I'm grateful that people don't realize that, because what happens is most people just quit. They just quit. And it makes it way easier for the guys like me, the guys like Chris, all the men, women, et cetera, that are in the entrepreneur space that actually get through it, because they love the digging process rather than worried about ever hitting the gold. And then when you hit the gold, you go, oh, wait, hold on. I got a bigger problem, because I never really planned on having this much gold. This is actually a problem. I just want to go back to digging. It's an interesting world to enter into. So for you guys that are listening right now, the reason you're not successful, I'll tell you, if you're somebody in here that's like, yeah, I haven't hit the success that I think I deserve. First and foremost, what problem? Chris brought this up earlier. What problem do you directly fix, solve, Band-Aid over for your customer? What is the problem that you bring? And who are your customers? And are you actually bringing something to them that solves a big problem? Big problems get big paychecks. Boom. Number two, if I dropped you in the middle of the United States with nothing but a computer and a cell phone right now, what skills do you have that you could make money by the end of the day? The problem is most people with a 9-to-5 job is this is how they're conditioned. They go to a job and they show up and then magically a paycheck hits their bank account. They show up and a paycheck hits their bank account. I've got a sister-in-law. She'll never listen to this podcast, so I'm safe. Sister-in-law works at Republic Services, the big, massive $1 billion trash services company. She says, I don't think anybody in this company even knows what I do, and I make $170,000 a year. And I'm like, well, what do you do? And she goes, I really don't quite know. I work maybe 2 to 3 hours a week. And I'm like, and you make 170 grand? She's like, yeah, that's kind of like corporate America. Like, get used to it. This is what happens. Like, there's just so many people and so many layers to so many people that there's a lot of people who have 9-to-5 jobs that really have been now conditioned in their middle age to believe that if you show up, you get a paycheck. And folks, I'm going to tell you right now, that is not how entrepreneurship is. You can sit in your desk and think really, really hard about starting a business, but unless you are willing to put in the hard work, get on the phone, close deals, whether they're real estate or insurance or anything else, it does not matter what your widget is. Selling hamburgers, for heaven's sakes. If you're not there doing the work for 5 years without expectation, okay, that's the thing. Ice Cube said it really well. He says, if you're not willing to jump into your hustle for 5 years before making 50 cents, then don't start. And I was like, wow, really? 5 years? And then I look back at myself and go, oh, wait, that's how it was for me too. It takes years of dedication, sacrifice, et cetera, because you fall in love with digging. So if you're somebody out there that's like, I want to be successful. I want to make $1 million in a year one day. I want to make $1 million in a month one day. I want to make $1 million in a week one day. Guys, all of that requires skills that solve a big problem, right? Raising money, closing a big deal, developing relationships that you can leverage to sell a product or whatever it is, to open up a new opportunity or whatever it is. Those are skills that are not developed in your W-2. And so what happens, you get home from your W-2 and you have to sacrifice. I don't know any other way. This is a question that comes up all the time, I'm sure to you, Chris, as well, is how do you balance it all? And in their mind, they're thinking, I have to quit my W-2 in order to focus on becoming an entrepreneur. And I disagree with that. I say, if you're not willing to be at your W-2, come home, kiss your babies, tell your wife, tell your children, I have to sacrifice for the next 3 to 4 years in the wee hours of the night or the wee hours of the morning, and you're not going to see me as much as you'd like, and I'm going to fail, and I'm going to screw things up for 3 or 4 years before I can quit my job, then you got it all wrong. I see people wanting to quit their job before they even start a side hustle because they think that we as entrepreneurs only work 8 hours a day. Have there been days, Chris, where you're like, where did the whole day go? And you worked 18 hours and you only got maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep and you missed a lot of things along the way?
That's every single week, but I don't look at it like that. I don't say, oh my God, that was an 18-hour day that was sucked. I would look at it like, oh my God, look at how much happened during that day. I can't understand how people do 9 to 5. I feel like I'd go crazy if I had to work 9 to 5. I try to get here earlier and I do stay too late. And that was one of the sacrifices, but it's not because sometimes I have to, it's because I'm just addicted to what it is I do. And I love what you said there, and I'm going to add to it. I tell people all the time when they're thinking about getting into business, quitting their job, I'm like, what would you do for free? What do you love to do so much that you would just do it for free every day? When they tell me what that is, I then say, okay, that right there is something you love because it fulfills something in you or solves a problem for you. Now, how many other people need that same problem solved? Go solve their problem. My business, the BYOB and, the money school and all these businesses, what a lot of people don't know is I didn't start these as a business. I just started using it. I started using the process called the infinite banking concept. And when I started using it, I got addicted to it because it was so cool. It was just so fun. Just like you, Pace. Like when you started doing Sub 2, you didn't have the logo. You didn't call it Sub 2. You were just like, holy crap, this is freaking cool. The digging, you fell in love with the digging, but it was just going out there doing what you do today in a different capacity. You were doing it for yourself. I did the same thing. I was so in love with what I did that one day, and it was my wife. My wife was like, you have to help Brent do this. She literally kicked me under the table after Brent came out and spoke at my RIA and said, Chris wants to help you do this. And I really didn't. I was just doing it myself. But she's like, you have the gift to help people with this. And that was the moment. That was where I flipped from like it just being for me and this like cool little thing that just fascinated me every time I looked at it to now I'm like, all right, I can teach people how to do this. And I started doing that. And then you get the testimonials and you get the feedback, and people come up to you after you get off the stage and they say, oh my God, you've helped change my life and my family's life. And like the digging is what you have to be in love with, but it usually will start with something that you're doing for yourself that you just love to do. Some people it's gardening, some people it's baking, like Pampered Chef. That woman started that company with a loan from her whole life policy, but she started it because she loved to cook. She sold it to Warren Buffett for well in excess of $1 billion, like because she loved the digging. It's so important when people look at what they're going to quit their job for or what they're going to go into business for, do it because you love it, not because you think it's going to make you money. If you do it thinking you're going to make money at it, you'll probably fail most of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that. I was watching this new movie that just came out. It's called the Fabelmans. And you're on a plane, you watch movies. So I'm watching this movie, and it's about a kid that has this obsession with making films. And he has his uncle come and visit one day, sneaks into his room and says, I'm going to tell you something. Your hobby is going to be the hardest thing in your life. And the young kid goes, what are you talking about? It's where I get all my joy from. I love this. I just want to do it all the time. He says, there's going to come a point in your life where you have other joys that you have to make decisions over. And so that's what we're talking about, is that, guys, we don't look at work as work. Chris and I get to wake up every single morning. We do exactly what we want to do. And magically, because we dug that ditch long enough, a gold appeared in our path. Then the challenge is some people, here's the thing is, okay. I see people go, why do you work so much? You've got kids, you've got all these other things going on. Why don't you just stop working? And the reality is that the mentality of the person asking me that question looks at their work as a poisonous endeavor they have to do every day. They cannot fathom why Chris would want to work 18 hours a day. They cannot fathom why I would want to work 18 hours a day and not even feel like it was 18 hours, but feel like, wow, where'd the day go? I haven't even eaten all day. I've just had so much fun doing all these things. That is where it makes a really challenging decision, because you get personal fulfillment that also brings in income for your family. That then makes it a hard decision for you to go and say, how do I shut all that off to just go and focus on these other things, whether it's family, your daughter, a dance recital, maybe it's a church project or a charity thing or whatever it is. You have other things you have to do. It's really hard because you fell in love with the process and you fell in love with the business that you currently have. And so tearing away from something that provided so much joy and fulfillment really becomes the challenge. And everybody I know that's ultra successful, worth, let's say $10 million or more, they all have that same problem. They fell in love so much with digging the ditch and digging, the trench, that now they wake up and they go, wait, you're telling me I shouldn't be digging this trench? I love it. I want to keep doing it. So it's interesting. It's interesting that, some people won't understand what the hell I'm talking about, because it's like telling a 6-month-old baby, don't touch the stove, it's hot. The baby doesn't know what that means. But when you guys get to this level, which you will get there if you persist and you understand some of the principles in this conversation, you'll get there and you'll look back and go, holy crap. I remember when Chris and Pace were talking about the balance between things that fulfill you, whether it be work or otherwise, and other things that fulfill you. And you have to figure out, how do I integrate those things that I can have a perfectly balanced life? I feel like what you're doing and choosing to travel less is going to help your business blow up.
I know it will.
It will.
I know in my heart it will. Parts of me say, don't stop. You got so much momentum, but those same parts that say don't stop because of the momentum are also the ones saying that momentum will rip you in half and make you regret things. And I made that decision literally just a few weeks back, where after this Montana mastermind that I'm speaking at this weekend, like, it's on pause. And for the first time in a long time, I'm so freaking excited about that moment. And I'm not excited. I'm not going to work less. I'll probably work more. Like, you talk 18, I probably will do consistent 18-hour days, but I'll be doing them in a different capacity where my focus is going to change on working on the business and working on all of the stuff that I've not had time to work on. And my team can only go so far, because obviously when you're a visionary with your business and you're the dreamer, like, nobody can fill those shoes. They can come close, but they can't fill the visionary's shoes. When Steve Jobs died, the visionary died. Mm-hmm. Apple, not that it's a bad company, not that they're not doing amazing things, but think about it. When he died, what has happened in Apple that has literally wowed us? Not much. Not much at all. Not actually, I don't think anything. The visionary died. You can't replace the visionary. So every one of you listening to this, whatever you take out of it or not, just realize when you look in the mirror, you are the visionary, you are the dreamer. Yeah. And the only thing that can stop you from reaching whatever levels of success you desire is you not leaping, you listening to somebody else's failed dreams, failed realities. You know who that is? It's always the people closest to you telling you shouldn't do this. That's too risky. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't buy Pace's course. You're going to lose your money and nothing's going to happen of it. If you listen to them, just realize you're listening to somebody's failed dreams. That's all that is. Their fear that they're instilling in you is because they never took the leap that Pace and I did, that all of you have to do. It's tough. We just explained how hard it is. But once you leap, there's nothing more fulfilling than the digging on the other side of that, than that constant pursuit. And it will come to a point where it's not about the money, folks. And I know that's so difficult for so many of you to understand, but you will hit a point where it's not the money you're working toward. It's what it is you're fulfilling. And it really comes down to what I want to kind of wrap this show up with is, what is your legacy? I think a long time ago, a legacy to me was the car that I left in the garage, the house that I left for the family, the money in the bank, and maybe the death benefit that was in my life insurance. That is not a legacy. Today, and my TEDx talk that I did, my legacy is what people will remember me for, like the smiles that I put on their face, the lives that I changed, but more specifically, what I teach my daughter so that she can be a better human being, not so she can have more, not so life can be easier for her. Matter of fact, I don't want life to be easier for her. And I'm going to make it difficult in the ways that I show this path to her. But I'm not making it difficult because I'm a jerk. I'm making it difficult because if somebody is given stuff, they never have the pursuit. And that would be like me robbing somebody of the greatest gift that God gave them, the passion, the pursuit of whatever it is you want. That's what I want my daughter to have. That's my legacy. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that she understands that. But Pace, what is your legacy?
As you were talking, I thought my legacy is the actions of my children.
100%.
The actions of your children will end up being your legacy, right? The things that, not what you do, because you'll be in the grave, but it's the things that your immediate children, their children's children's, and end up doing, and how they can, like, look at DuPont, right? DuPont is a family that, it's really interesting to think about the legacy of DuPont. DuPont, if anybody's paying attention to this, go and YouTube DuPont history, and you'll find out that DuPont saved their own family from despair. DuPont invented pantyhose. They invented gunpowder. They invented some of the most commonly used things, plastics and other chemical things that we use today. The tire, they invented like the high quality tire that we know today. And, looking back at their history, they were going to let their family was going to sell the business in the Depression. They were going to sell the business to a competitor, and they were going to change the name from DuPont to something else. And one of the children that was working on one of the manufacturing line, one of the children of DuPont, like the grandchildren's grandchildren, were working on the manufacturing line. And they said, I want to buy DuPont and keep it in the family name, because what's happening right now is they're tearing down my family legacy. They're going to sell this to a competitor when we should keep this inside the family. So that young man, he was 22 years old, came into the board at DuPont and said, I want to buy this business on creative finance. I want you to create new shares in a new company. One of the best stories, I won't tell the whole thing, but he saved the company, and at the time they were doing $10 million a year in revenue, which is the equivalent of about $100 million a year in today's money. Today they do close to $400 billion in revenue, and they kept it in the family's name. So your legacy is what your children end up doing and how you teach your children and what they end up doing and compounding and providing jobs to other generations and other families and providing charity to other people that don't have it. I was talking to Tony Robbins. He says his legacy, he has 111 businesses he owns. He's a billionaire. All the money you could ever imagine. Like, what are you ever going to do with $1 billion? But he says the one thing that people will remember me by is that I fed over 100 billion people a meal for a year. 100 billion people, or 100 billion meals is what it was for a whole year. And I'm like, wow, that is insanity. 100 billion meals. So this year, it just in 60 or 6 months, they provided 60 billion of his 100 million goals just in 6 months. And he goes, I was thinking too small. He's like, that is my legacy. Everything, all the merit badges, all the skill sets, the resources, the experiences, all the relationships, all compounded into this moment where I can give 60 billion meals away in 6 months and realize my goal was too small. And I'm like, that's legacy. That's something where people are eating and being nourished from a man that they'll never meet or even know where that meal even came from. That is freaking legacy.
I always talk about a story I heard early on in my financial advisor years, and it was about what we do. And what they were talking about is they said, you want to create a legacy so that your kids' will always remember your name. They talked about this strategy and how they did this, and they layered it so that every single year on the birthday of that child that grandpa who set this up would never know, never be around for, on their birthday, they got a check for $10 or $100. I can't remember the dollar amount. It wasn't a lot. But every year on their birthday, they got this check, and it just said, happy birthday from grandpa. And this legacy then was passed down from generation to generation. So each one of these children that got grandpa's check that they never knew, then did that for their children, and their children did it for their children, and their children did it for their children. And it never ended because of one thing that grandfather did to make that legacy happen. And
I'm going to write that down.
Stop.
That's freaking genius.
I'll never forget that story. It was amazing. And there's another story too that I remember, and I know we'll wrap after this, but this is another legacy and an important lesson. It was about this salesman who went out. He was going out on a sales call. It was to this elderly woman, and he pulls into the house, and the house was a banged up, beat up, tiny little house in a bad part of the neighborhood. And he contemplated not even going in. This is going to be a waste of my time. I can't believe I'm even here. Those sacrifices, I could be home with my family. I could be out seeing somebody in, one of those nice neighborhoods, but he was there. So he got out and he went in, and, he met this old woman who didn't have much, and he ended up, doing a little bit of work for her, but actually just spent more time just talking to her. He left. Didn't feel fulfilled, didn't really feel like, that was, he didn't feel like it was a waste of his time because he had a good conversation, but he didn't feel like it was a good use of his time. A couple months later, he gets a call from somebody, and they say, hey, recently you went out and saw, this elderly woman, we'll make her name Teresa for the sake of this conversation. You went and saw Teresa, and she said how nice you were and the conversations you shared with her and the time you spent without asking for anything. Well, Oprah Winfrey would like to set up an appointment with you so you can help her with her life insurance. You see, that woman, Teresa, that you went out and saw was a relative of Oprah. And as soon as you left, she let Oprah know how amazing you were and how much time you spent and how much she enjoyed the conversation, that Oprah wanted to bottle that and also wanted you to help her. Folks, sometimes from the surface, from what you see, you cannot judge something. You can't judge a situation, a circumstance. You can't judge a person. Like, imagine if he had just backed out of that rickety old house in a bad part of the neighborhood because he just felt like it was going to be a waste of his time. He would have given up the opportunity to meet Oprah Winfrey and help her. What was that relationship worth? But you see, sometimes it's the things that you don't want to do that lead to the things that you only dreamed of doing. Pace going out and seeing Tony Robbins, like, there was something that he did in his past that maybe he didn't want to do, a sacrifice that he made that he had to give time up for, that led him to that moment where he was able to spend that time with Tony Robbins. Folks, sometimes the things in life that you don't want, sometimes the things in life that seem like such a waste of time are the exact things, because you're never, ever put in a situation that you were not meant to be put in. But it's how you handle the situation that determines your destiny. And that's all I have to say about that. But Pace, listen, like, everything you're doing is just incredible to watch from this level. And I've kind of watched a lot of the journey. I've missed a lot of the steps, but you're just doing amazing things, man. And, from me to you, I'm always your biggest cheerleader. I'm not going to have the pom-poms, but like every time I see your success, I see you flying a private jet, I see you with Tony Robbins, like, just know that I'm sitting here cheering you. And I know there's a lot of people that are sitting there, and I know some of these people saying, oh, that Pace guy, blah, blah, blah. I'm not, and nobody else should be, because at certain levels of success, at any level of success, there always has to be somebody rah-rahing you all the way up, because there is no top.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me. And then this was a fun conversation. I've not had this conversation with anybody, even other entrepreneurs, talking about sacrifices that we have to give up. It's something that we all know, because we all share we all kind of burden the same cross, so to speak, but we don't get to talk outwardly about it. And I think it's important for people that are trying to come up in the game of entrepreneurship, that they need to understand that this is not something you wake up in the morning and you just go, wow, I own a business and everything's working great and all the money just pouring in and I can sip my coffee on the beach. Guys, that is not how this is. So this was a fun conversation for me. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Chris.
You're welcome, Pace. Thank you for your time. And folks, you all know how to find Pace. You just go to pacemorby.com. You find him on Instagram, on YouTube. Make sure if you go to his YouTube channel, you like and subscribe his channel. I think it's the ultimate give when we put our time into making these videos on YouTube. Just share back by just hitting that little subscribe button. But thank you all for joining us. It was a conversation that we didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't really have a plan. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you take some golden nuggets out of this. And I hope it gets all of you to never, ever stop 3 feet from gold. With that being said, thanks for joining us for this episode. We'll see you on the next one.